Yo, B, let's go.
You may have seen the clip and maybe heard word of mouth, yet another podcast. Man, what could it be about? Is it truth or opinion? A couple of contradictions. We're here to challenge tradition and twist your vision. So we set on a mission to bring you rebel wisdom.
Welcome back to another episode of Rebel Wisdom. I'm Julian with my co-host B, and today we are going to be discussing minimum wage, another financial topic, as we so often do, and we're going to be just kind of rebel against it as we do. The common narrative against minimum wage, which I would say, from what I hear, B, correct me if you're wrong or if you've heard something different. I usually hear people like a blanket argument like, hey, minimum wage needs to go up. It needs to be raised. I haven't dug into it too deep, but just my everyday ventures, that's the narrative I pretty much hear. Is that on par with what you hear or what?
Yeah, no, I don't exactly what I hear. I just don't know what they mean when they say minimum wage should go up.
Right.
Should it go up by $1 or should it go up by $20? But
Right.
because depending on that number, I'm gonna more in line agree or disagree. So
Well said. Yeah. I love how you phrased that. So yeah, that's what we're gonna get into because, like you said, the blankets narrative we both hear is, hey, it needs to raise. Which I'm gonna hold my opinion because I align with B, depending on maybe how much we raise it. I think there's some stipulations with that. So let's get into it. I'm gonna start by my quick Google search of what is the purpose of minimum wage. Or even, I guess, before that, what is minimum wage? It is, the minimum wage that a person is owed. This is my definition, by the way. I'm not looking at anything. To sustain life, right? Just the absolute minimum wage that a worker will get. But the internet says that the purpose of minimum wage is to protect workers from being paid excessively low wages, ensuring they receive a basic level of income to cover essential needs like food and shelter, thereby preventing exploitation by employers and contributing to a minimum standard of living for employees. It essentially sets a floor below which wages cannot legally fall. Cool. That's minimum wage in a nutshell. And B, I think this is interesting because we're coming off an episode where we recently did universal basic income, which was a theory to kind of replace welfare, right? Which is another program, if you will, that helps give people pretty much minimal wages to sustain life. So I think that conversation will kind of be very relevant in today's topic, which is actually minimum wage. Yeah, so let's get into our thoughts on, is minimum wage good in practice? Is it too low? Is it too high? What are your entering thoughts?
yeah, so I pulled up a graph and I think it stems very nicely from the definition that you gave of
Fair.
federal minimum wage was intended, like you said, to have a minimal amount that you can sustain everyday life, right? Something along those lines. And then I have a chart in here. It's from the Economic Policy Institute.org. So maybe definitely has more credibility than what my personal opinion, right?
Right.
So they have a graph that shows all the way from inception of minimum wage, which was October of 1938 to July of 2022 or 2022. And
that's good.
That doesn't matter because 2025, 2022 minimum wage hasn't changed. So argument's still the same. And it's post-COVID, which we saw a big, inflation hike. So that kind of matters too. But they calculated, obviously, when minimum wage, I think the first minimum wage set in 1938 was like 50 cents an hour or something like that, right?
Sure, makes sense.
Obviously, 50 cents is more valuable than it was today.
Right.
But basically what this graph shows is calculated with inflation in mind. What is 50 cents worth today? And they do that for every single year from 1938 to today, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it sucks because it doesn't tell me the exact number, but When the minimum wage was first established, adjusted for inflation, it is lower than 7.25 today, which is crazy, I think, because like minimum wage today, 7.25, like
Wow.
we were just doing little math right before the
Yeah.
podcast started. Like I don't see a feasible way where one can live on their own without help from others, without social welfare on that basic amount. I just don't see it.
Right.
Maybe I'm not frugal enough. I don't know. And somewhere along the way, it does peak out at $12 an hour for minimum wage, adjusted for inflation, right? So the actual value is not $12, but adjusted for today's dollar value is $12. And that was in 1968. And all the way from 1968, there's ups and downs, but overall trend is going down. And that's where, I mean, I don't want to say it just recently started, definitely not, but that's where the argument comes from. Hey, minimum wage needs to be raised to account for today's time.
So when you say it's going down, are you talking about that value converted to today's dollars with inflation is trending down since 1968? Okay. Yeah, which I mean, at face value, one would argue is not good. Okay, so that's good context right there. Yeah, so I mean, I don't. Yeah, so you said I was looking at the unemployment rate, which is what 4.1% now, which the last, like you said, it was around that in 2022, but looking back from around, we'll say 2008, maybe post like housing market crash, it was up to almost like 10%, 2009. So it's looking at the last, we'll say since around 2005. So yeah, call it 20 years. It's pretty low, comparatively. The unemployment rate, which is, I mean, yes, which is a good thing. We like low unemployment rates. But I mean, I think the unemployment rate has some correlation, uh, maybe with minimum wage. So for instance, like if minimum wage were to, let's say, go up, right? Because that's what the general narrative is, and we are here to rebel. You could argue that would maybe not pricing people out, but those jobs, if the federal minimum wage goes up, so everybody is forced to raise their minimum wage because states can implement a higher minimum wage, which most of them do. But if the federal minimum wage, which is like the wage floor, goes up, then you would argue that not only, I mean, some businesses, depending on how much it goes up by, employers simply aren't going to be able to pay their labor force and would unfortunately go out of business. But beyond that, I would think if I'm just putting my mind in like a business owner or again an employer, you're gonna want to get more. You're gonna want to be more strict about like the talent you pick, like who you employ, or you find ways to reduce your labor force at all. So you're not paying too much, and you're not losing too much cost due to your labor force. So that could drive the unemployment rate up if we, I mean, from that one point, you know what I mean? If we increase the minimum wage, which is something I don't know if people think about. And I could see like from the pool of unemployment people, that 4.1%, those are probably people that would heavily advocate for minimum wage because, they're probably looking for jobs, maybe entry level jobs, these jobs just to kind of get their feet under them to get going. Like they're probably going to start maybe at a minimum wage job. So yeah, why wouldn't they want a higher minimum wage, right? That makes sense. But it could have like inverse effects raising the minimum wage, which I think is something interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's super ironic. And I do want to add one more point to what you just said, but going back to what you said, the whole minimum wage thing, like it doesn't affect the middle class too much, right? Because majority of
Are
middle class are
making
not
more.
working minimum wage
Right.
jobs.
Yep.
So it's ironic in a sense that the people going after the minimum wage jobs, which tend to be in a lower economic class, right? We can just say they want minimum wage raised, which you outlined. Depending, obviously, it's going to depend on the severity. The severity is going to depend on how much the minimum wage is increased, but that pretty much affects them and them only. And that's on that's if we say, hey, businesses are forced to raise their hourly rate and they have to cut some people that would in turn increase unemployment. So I just think it's crazy that like they're advocating for something that it's not going to have a good outcome for them. It's like a short term band-aid fix.
Yeah.
And to add on to what you said, so they can either the businesses can either just, I guess cut people to fire people to have less of a, workers to account for the increase in wages, or they can increase their products prices and just increase their margin, right?
Right.
So if they have to increase all the pay by 10%, but then they can increase their profits by 10% or whatever the math that
Right.
equates to
Mm-hmm.
the losses that you're getting. Like if it equals out, like whatever, right? For the business, they're still making the same amount of money, but that also has a spiral effect on the inflation that's been a hot
Yes.
topic for the last few years. And inflation hits harder the less money you have, which also affects the people going after the minimum wage jobs. So it's like it sucks to say this, but
Yeah.
it's not like in my personal opinion, like raising the minimum wage again depends on the dollar amount, but it's just not a winning formula for the people that's applying for these jobs, regardless of which way the business goes. Just adding on to the fact that if we talked about how a small business company, whatever, they can make more to compensate for paying more to their workers, but that's only if they have a big enough market share where they have a competitive advantage of some sort. Because, for example, if I go to, I don't know, a local coffee shop, for example, right? And then federal minimum wage raised to $15. They were paying their workers $10 before, let's just say. And then let's say they can't afford to lose the workers because there's barely anyone working. And if they start paying these people at $15, they might start losing money. So what do they have to do? They have to raise prices. And if they raise prices, like me, for example, I don't really care where I get my coffee, right? I'm
Some
gonna
people
just
do.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, some people do, right? But then
Yeah.
this applies to everything, not just for
Right.
coffee.
Exactly.
But I'll just go somewhere down the street
Right.
and get a cheaper coffee.
Yep.
So that in turn also hurts the business in terms of the revenue side as well. And maybe the people that advocated for these minimum wage increases, they got the minimum wage increase, they're happy about it, but then they get laid off because, hey, sorry, like this business isn't making as much money and we can't increase our products or prices of our products. So another thing to think about too.
Absolutely, dude. And conversely to that, there's some points that are saying like, okay, but if you raise minimum wage, if you raise minimum wage, then okay, people have more dollars to not only sustain themselves but to spend and to circulate. So it can lead to people having more disposable income, like within the households, not necessarily the business, but within the households. So people are likely to spend more. So maybe more people now are buying coffee, so like offsets. But again, those are such like it's so hard to calculate that, and I feel like that's just a lofty like assumption. I mean, it's an economic effect, sure, but I just always find this conversation so interesting because for everything we name where we can like a reason for it to go up, like there's a reason, an argument for minimum wage going up, like there's almost like an equal counter argument to the exact same point. Which I think is, I mean, that's what makes it fun to talk about, honestly. But in this particular topic, everybody wants it to go up because, sure, at face value, raising minimum wage, like the big things are like improve standard of living and reduce poverty. Like great, what governing forces, what country doesn't want to like let's reduce poverty. Like if I'm a politician, that would be like a hard stance. I want to reduce poverty. Like, yeah, it sounds great. And at a basic level, I guess the minimum wage in theory tackles that. But again, with all of these little nuances, it could cause inflation and it could reduce your labor force and increase unemployment. And if you unemployment, then you could, uh, welfare. We might need more welfare, which we discussed in our other episode, which
Yeah.
we think is a failing product for what it was intended for. So, just very fascinating on, what the intent of this is, and like the blanket narrative of like, hey, we need to raise minimum wage, which possibly, but let's talk about like, yeah, like how by how much and what that could do.
Yeah. How much do you think?
Yeah. So I think I would say like kind of we've discussed before, I would say only fractionally. And let me start by saying from our quick like research, what I can tell, minimum wage has not increased in the last 15 years, which already to me personally is a red flag because as we know, there's been um the market has shifted a great deal in 15 years. With the booming technology, I mean, COVID hit. There's been so many significant market stimulus, I guess, effects in the last 15 years that it'd be easy to argue almost anywhere across the U.S. Right, cost of living has probably gone up. Even in the least cases, it's probably gone up a little bit, but I'm sure probably everywhere it's gone up. So for me to hear that minimum wage has stayed stagnant for 15 years already kind of like perks my ears up, and I'm like, that does strike me as interesting. However, if like we said, it's 725 right now, and some, if we're like, hey, a minimum wage should go up, which we calculated, if somebody works 725, earns $7.25 an hour, working 40 hours a week over a course of a year, it gave us like, I'm gonna say $15,200 annually, roughly, right? Sure, they could work more hours, but that was just to baseline the concept of $7.25 an hour, which, like we said, is probably not enough to really sustain a minimal life even at that. So aside from working more hours, like what are some things we could do, right? And then in comes the argument, raise minimum wage. But if we do so, to go from 725, let's say Trump takes office, which will be in a couple of days now, and he's like, hey, we're increasing minimum wage to $15. I would disagree with that. And we can talk about some of the reasons why. First and foremost, with some things we already touched on, like we would see so many businesses close, which I think America has small businesses particularly, America has I don't know what, like a stigma on like, if you want to start a small business, like come to America, like this is the place to
Yeah.
start small.
It's
What
the
I mean?
best
That's like
place
one
to
of our
start
biggest
it.
like selling points.
Yeah.
I think raising minimum wage, the federal minimum wage would destroy small businesses, first and foremost. And then it just goes back to some things we were saying. Like, I think you're going to reduce your labor force, which is going to increase unemployment. And then you brought up the inflation piece. I think depending on how it's offset, like we could see hikes in inflation, which again is going to have huge effects on the lower income population. So I would caution against, unless somebody knows something that I don't, against raising it drastically. And I think like fractional raises over or maybe a longer period of time would be better, because I think if I had to pick lower or keep the same, I definitely want lower minimum wage or raise it. Dude, I would go with raise it, but maybe like it's 725, maybe to like $8 for a year or two, and see how that affects. Um, and it's also interesting. An argument is, raising minimum wage could promote fairness, like amongst the job, because people are getting paid more equally for the work that they're doing. But that could have like also backfiring. Like I said, for every point, there's like a counterpoint. Psychological effects for the person that's thinks they deserve more. It's like, hey, I do more, or let's say I'm in a more skilled position, but this person at this entry level or non-skilled position is getting paid closer to what I'm getting paid or whatever. And like, I don't think that's fair. So maybe some of your more skilled labor starts to leave because they don't think, you just never know, like all those unforeseen things um could happen, and you work against your ability to discern between like levels of work, whether it be like academic or skill set or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to make a couple comments on a couple of things he said.
Yeah, I said a lot.
And I mean, first is like, I mean, however you want to see it. I mean, I'm I mean, we'll say Republicans, right? Not Trump, but we'll
Yeah.
say Republicans are generally opposed to raising the minimum wage.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I know it was an example. You said, "Oh, Trump could raise it to $15," but I'm
Yeah.
glad because I'm on the side of it. Like, I feel like if he tried to raise it, the raise gonna be a little too drastic. I feel like at the
Mhm.
government level, and then I'm glad that at least while Republicans are office, like they're not gonna raise it.
Mm.
Because I have a whole bunch of reasons why I don't think minimum wage needs to go up
Okay.
in the first place. And so that's one. Like I don't like in the next 4 years, I don't think minimum wage. I mean, even if they do, it's gonna be what you said. It's gonna be very marginal, right?
Yeah.
And I also have a thought on the margin piece.
Okay.
And I was thinking like, what if again another failed government program of
Yeah.
Social Security, right? I was like Social Security, depending on the inflation report of September, I think if I remember correctly, I think or it could be August or October, but it's in the fall time frame.
Okay.
Whatever the inflation report says during that time, that's how much they increase their social security payments. It's similar for military defense budget bill to increase the military salaries and stuff like that.
Right.
And what if we did something similar for minimum wage, like where if Social Security is going up by 4.35%
Mm.
this year, maybe the minimum wage goes up by 4.3, and then
Yeah.
like let's be real, that's like very drastic. And is that enough to to get to the original intent of the federal minimum wage of trying to maintain a minimum lifestyle? No, I
Yeah.
don't think so, but something, right?
It's
And
something.
I think it'll please more people. It wouldn't be too much opposition from the people against it. Like for example, like I just said I'm against it, right? But if they
Right.
said, "Hey, we're gonna just match it to the cost of living increases they have for Social Security, we're gonna apply that to minimum wage," like I'd be like, okay, like
Right.
it's not too much. I get it.
Right.
It
And
makes
that's my
sense.
thing, bro. Like, I'm not economist or politician or whatever, but like, what is minimum wage tied to? Because it's hard for me to see anything if it hasn't moved in the last
Yeah.
15 years. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what you're saying. Like, tie it to something. Just like,
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you before the podcast, I was trying to look for this very particular graph that I saw.
Mhm.
I think it was like yesterday when I was trying to study up on the minimum wage stuff, and I couldn't find it, which I was like, oh man, it was such a good graph. But basically, it talked about where the average income for everyone
Mhm.
versus the minimum wage. And I mean, we can do that for just today's numbers, right? We'll say average income for US. In 2022, the average income
Is this household
was
income or
no,
like
just
person?
personal.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
personal. Is 37,000 in 2022,
Okay.
right? So we'll say 38K, right?
Okay.
So you can see how the minimum wage is 15,000, like we talked about. If you work 40 hours
40
a
hours.
week, and assume given those assumptions, it's less than 50% of the average salary
Right.
that people make a week.
Yeah.
But basically, the graph depicted the pretty much similar thing all across, I guess, history of minimum wage. Like when the minimum wage initially started, it was
was-
way below the average income that people
Interesting.
made, and throughout history. So it it may be bad right now, but like when you it only affects very, I don't want to say
Small
few
people.
people, but few percentage of people. Because I mean, the average is average, right? Like majority of the people make
Yeah.
more than the minimum wage.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
I think it was interesting while I was looking up other articles too. I found one by Foundation for Economic Education. And then the first bullet that they talk about is what you mentioned. It was like, what if they raised minimum wage to $15, the exact dollar amount
Yeah.
that you just mentioned?
Yeah.
And then they took a survey of, I don't know how many economists, but they said 72, so
Said no.
72% of economists opposed the $15 minimum wage
Oh yeah.
due to all the effects that we talked about, right?
That doesn't surprise me.
And so I don't think we're wrong. Does it sound harsh? Sure. I wish I could be the angel just like everyone else. Say, hey, yeah, like let's increase minimum wage to $73, right? But like that's only a Band-Aid fix, and I'm gonna bring in Dave Ramsey again, right? So he obviously do I agree with everything he says? I don't. Is he much smarter and more successful than me? Yeah, absolutely. So that's why I look up to him in a lot of ways. But one of the things that he talks about is a lot of people come to him. He's like, hey, I'm in X amount of debt, and it's a lot, right? And it's like, hey, like, can I file bankruptcy? And like, I've never heard him say, yeah, go ahead and file bankruptcy, because would filing bankruptcy, financially speaking, numbers wise, would that be the wise choice to make? And in a lot of scenarios, I would argue, yeah, like it's probably a better to file bankruptcy than trying to pay $300K of student loan debt that you can't discharge through a bankruptcy. But his reasoning behind it is bankruptcy is a short-term solution, but as long as you don't fix your mindset and your behavior and your habits, you're not going to get out of debt. You're going to just go back in after file bankruptcy, worst place, you're going to just go back into debt, and the cycle continues forever. So to say that, to apply it to this minimum wage argument, right? Basically, people are trying to say, hey, minimum wage is too low, increase it, which is the same thing as saying, hey, I want to earn more without doing any extra stuff, right?
Yes.
True. So let's say minimum wage goes up to the 20 or 15, whatever dollar.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
If people, like, let's say for, I don't know, an electrician, let's just make an argument for it's totally inaccurate, but let's say that they're making $20 an hour, right? Or it doesn't have to be electrician. It could be any trade job or you need technical skills to perform.
Right.
And let's say fast food workers that I could have worked at fast food if they let me in like elementary school. Let's be real. Like I could have done the job, right? Like you don't need any skill set to work at fast. Is it tough? Yeah, of course it is. But skill set wise, you don't need skills to work at a fast food place. If the wage is somewhat similar, then I think it has two effects. One of them, I think you kind of mentioned already, like it would be unfair for the electricians to be like, hey, how come this, like I went to this trade school, I risked my life working with electricity every day. How come they make just as much as me? Let me just go over there and work there. Like the easier job, you have headphones. Like I go to McDonald's and people are just in pajamas, like working there. Like, the easy work environment, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. And another thing is like, if someone out of high school or anywhere in life is like, hey, I'm making just as much as these like skillful guys, I'm good in life. That doesn't create any urgency to get out of that minimum wage job. That doesn't sound, I get it. It's not it's not, you're not living in paradise by working a minimum wage job. It's tough. I get it. But that should kind of motivate you to be like, hey, I want to change my habits. I want to change the direction of my career. I want to change the direction of my life, just like Dave Ramsey talks about. And that's the biggest thing for me is like, I don't believe in people just getting free money, just like we talked about in the UBI thing, right? And how, like, instead of that, to change your mindset, how can I provide more value to make more money? I feel like that should be a more of an emphasized message behind this conversation in minimum wage. Like, sure, it was intended to, for people to live a minimum life. Surprise, surprise, just like any other government program, it failed. But yeah, no one should, like, nowhere in history they were like, hey, minimum wage is enough for you to, I don't know, have serve a family of 4, have 2 cars, and do a vacation or 2 a year and retire. Like that was never the intent. It will never be.
Correct.
So let's get out of that.
Yeah.
try or
Well, that
at least try.
right. Again, minimum wage, I think, which is the focus word there, minimum. Like what you described, like 2 cars, 4 kids, like that's not a minimum lifestyle. So yeah, it's gonna be very hard to support a non-minimalist lifestyle with a minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
And you brought up a bunch of good points. I think, I think, yeah, so that graph, I'm gonna go back to that graph you mentioned. That basically showed minimum wage has always been around 50% of what the average annual income is, like in a comparison. That's actually strikes me as very interesting, because and just because it's always been that, right? That kind of reinforces the narrative of like, oh, it's literally always been that. It's okay if it's 50%. I mean, just because something always been
You're right.
a way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. I think that just proves that it didn't collapse society, or it's not like detrimental. We can exist like that. But like, could it be better if we raise it a little bit? I don't know. That's to be determined because we're not raising it. So I'd be interested to see if it did raise, and that delta between the minimum wage and the annual average person income, decrease with minimum wage going up, just what it would do. But again, I still caveat that if minimum wage did go up, I think it should only be like marginally. But again, right, you made a lot of good points. If it went up, the adverse effects that I doubt a lot of people that wanted to go up have actually considered, which is why it's, I think there's value in rebelling some of these topics. And another one is, a lot of these jobs have benefits packages. Like I know the job you work at, you get certain benefits. A lot of jobs offer various benefits. A counter argument to raising minimum wage would be, if again an employer has to raise minimum wage in addition to some of the things we named, because some of their money is now going into the wages, they might not be able to give you more incentives or give you bonuses or give you a medical package or give you support healthcare. So you might see some of those things go away, which are also attractive to employees that are coming to jobs. Like, hey, is there a performance bonus? Is there annual bonus? Do I get stock? Do I like how's my healthcare coverage? Like they might have to do away with some of those things. So once again, it's like, I mean, cool, yeah, minimum wage is going up, but like, what's coming with that? I feel like it's like, what's behind the curtain? There's they said there's always the and or there's always the but. It's like, yay, you get more money, but what? Which, again, we wouldn't know until it went up and it's hitting us. And now, I could see minimum wage go up to $15, 3 years could go by, and people could be like, yo, like this kind of sucks, or sure, I'm able to live not even more comfortably, a little bit more easier, but I'm missing out on my yeah, I don't know, it's hard to get groceries, or like my health care is not covered like I expected it to be. I don't know. Those are just examples. But
Yeah, I agree. Whatever we raise it to, in X amount of years, it's always gonna be, hey, the same conversations come up. Hey, it's not enough. We should raise it, and then it'll never stop. I don't think. So that's why, like, because it'll never stop, regardless of what the minimum wage is. That's why I'm more in lines of what we don't need to change it, right? Or that's at least my thinking, and at least my view on like what I support and what I like economy to be is more of the laissez-faire type
yeah, I see.
of style where less government interference is better. And man, I don't remember which episode we talked about, but I remember we talking about it. We are like, maybe it was like, maybe I forgot, but maybe maybe it was a sports episode. Should women
Women's
and
sports,
men's
sports get paid the
yeah
same.
should they get paid the same? Yeah. But we talked about how maybe in certain circumstances, right? Maybe government interference is good.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like the first female to go on a nuclear submarine in the U.S. Navy, for example. Like, it was good, I think, for government to let the gates open, right? But after that, I don't think anything needs to happen. I don't think we need to try to increase the amount of females on submarine ships. Like, the marketplace is naturally going to do that to the exact level where it meets equilibrium, right? So same thing. Sure, I'm not 100% laissez-faire, but
More
generally,
than-
I do think less government control is better for the government or for the economy, because like Democrat, Republican, whatever, I think we can all agree government spending is crazy and inefficient, and they don't usually do a lot of things right. Whereas on a company that's for profit, that has investors and they need to make returns and whatnot, like they're gonna manage their money, we'll say better than the government.
Yeah.
And with everyone, basically every single sector, every single small owner business, every single employee in this country, they have a self-interest. And then when we all raise our self-interest, it kind of literally like makes everything neutral.
Yes.
And same thing with minimum wage. Like, I get it. Would it be better for someone to make $9 versus $7.25? Yes. But if, let's say there was no federal minimum wage, like some people might get paid less than $7.25, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For sure.
But soon as a job opens that's paying more than them, they're gonna leave, most likely.
Yep.
And then the business can't hire anyone at $5 an hour, so they have to go raise it, right? So the natural way that's gonna run itself,
Yeah.
I think that kind of solves for minimum wage automatically. I think I could be totally wrong, but yeah, that's my reasoning for it. I don't think it's as big as deal as people make it out to be.
Good. Yeah. Good stuff. And I know, right? Like we're not making minimum wage, and for those that are at minimum wage, right? Like there's a struggle that comes with that. You stated earlier, it's not easy, and we understand that, but there's why there's people this is their field of study, to study these economic effects, because just blindly implementing something has so many ripples that, on the per person level, yeah, sure, it's good, but when you implement it in masses, like how is that going to create a shift or ripple? And to your laissez-faire point of, I'll say, anti raising of minimum wage, I think that Campbell people, they, like you said, the government in some, I don't know, fields, or in this case minimum wage, like them inserting themselves again, if the raise is too high, it like destabilizes the equilibrium of minimum wage. So some people are saying, like, let the supply and demand maybe like drive the minimum wage. And that goes back to kind of what I was like, just I guess tied to something, because again, and I keep going back to over the last 15 years with this thing stagnant, like even if it went up and it went back down, I don't know, but like it's hard for me to feel like anybody is taking a hard look, or analyzing, or just looking into minimum wage at all. But I certainly get your point of not having the government force itself and throw off that wage equilibrium, because that could like destabilize that sector, I guess. But I can see the argument of at least let it be driven almost naturally.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see. I think I don't remember. It was sometime last year. Maybe it was 2023. I think it was 2024. But I think California
Yes, I already know.
increased
They did.
like the fast food workers minimum wage to $20 an hour, right?
I think it was 20, because I know California's, as of right now, their state minimum wage is 16. But I think fast food, they did go up, and I think it was 20. They definitely went up in Cali, though.
Yeah, so it's within a year, or it's around a year at least. So it'll be very hard to see the economic effects that's gonna unravel from that.
Correct.
So I'll be interested to see in like 5 years, like how that affected California in particular. Going back to the, I guess the laissez-faire, or whatever you want to call it, like letting the economy determine the wage kind of thing, right? Like I have a real life example, like where before the company that I worked at, currently, I was working at a retail shop, and there's a lot of minimum wage workers that we worked with, right? A lot of them, like majority of the people were minimum wage. And I actually went on a training. I had to go to New Mexico to train at this store that was certified to be a training store or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting because I think the company had a policy where like no one is gonna get paid below $15. So regardless of what state you're in, like you're gonna make 15.
Mm.
And New Mexico, it was very weird because say New Mexico
Their minimum wage is $12 right now.
minimum wage is $12. So even higher than the minimum wage, right? $15, what our company was offering.
Yep.
But it was very interesting because I could throw a rock and I could hit Texas.
Yeah.
So it was like right on the border of New Mexico and Texas.
Yep.
Very, very, very close. So Texas minimum wage is $7.25, right?
Exactly.
So I was so shocked because my home store at the time was in Arizona, and we were struggling to find workers because it just didn't pay. We paid $15, right?
Mhm.
Arizona minimum wage I think is also 15. So we were the bottom of the barrel type thing, and then like it was very hard to get people, very hard to keep people. That was my experience. So I go to this training store in New Mexico. Like, I could not believe it.
Booming.
We had rock stars with like the people working there because it was so competitive. Like every single position was filled because people that live 5 minutes away on the Texas side sees that, hey, I could do the same thing and literally make double, more than double.
Man, it's right.
And I remember this guy. He worked at like a mom and pop, like a pet store type of thing. And he came over as like, dude, I think he just graduated high school. He was like 18 or 19. He was like, I am so freaking excited to work here and make $15. You have no idea. And it was kind of eye-opening to me because, I worked a minimum wage job in high school too. So I understand to a certain extent. But I was like, the the place that he just left that was paying him $7.25, like I think it would be very hard. Like if the minimum wage people looking for minimum wage are coming to my store that I was training at, like, and we are very selective, so we're getting the best of the best.
Yeah.
Right. That leaves the non-good workers, the lazier, just not they just don't care type people that's also going for minimum wage to go apply at those jobs that would take them. And then they're just going to have a very bad experience because they're low paying. You can't expect too much from them, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to backfire on them. So I was kind of thinking about that. And then maybe that, the only choice they have is to raise or go out of business. So I thought that was like a real life thing that, I thought was kind of interesting. And I'll never forget.
Yeah.
The experience, I guess. Yeah.
That is that's a good story. That's perfect. And that's a good thing to know too, right? Like the federal minimum wage can be superseded by the state minimum wage. I mean, only if it's higher. It can't go lower, but it can go higher. And I guess we were looking up. I guess if the state does go lower, they have to pay up until the federal wages, which kind of doesn't even make sense why I go lower. But so although the federal minimum wage is important, it is trumped in a lot of cases by a lot of states where the minimum wage, which makes sense because you have to adjust for the cost of living, which goes back to my point of being like, how has the federal minimum wage stayed stagnant? And maybe it stays stagnant because they're like, hey, the states have the authority to adjust, and most of them will. So like federally, maybe we don't need to. I don't know. Again, this is just me hypothesizing, but that is interesting to me. And it's also funny just to point out, like the two states with the highest minimum wage are the state of Washington, which
Okay.
I probably wouldn't have guessed that. And the other one is Washington, D.C., which I may have.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Those are the two with the highest state minimum wages at Washington $16.28 and DC $17.50. So I think DC has the highest minimum wage. But it just goes to show, right? Like to basically like $7.25 probably in the cheapest places is barely going to sustain your life. So yeah, in a California or, I guess Washington, it's not going to cut it. But that's why the states have the authority to set their own minimum wage, which I don't think I realized like a while ago, and I think that's great. But obviously that's there for a reason, because if they didn't, I guarantee you the federal minimum wage would be higher if the states didn't have that like autonomy to do it on the state level.
Dude.
just-
Okay, I'm gonna go here. I want to hear your opinion on this, right?
okay.
So I just also looked up, as of January 2025, the states with the highest minimum wages are you said DC and Washington, and there's also California,
Yep, it's up
and
there.
you also have New York.
Yes. Yep.
All four of those places that we just mentioned have something in common, and they're very well. There's two things, I think.
Okay.
The cost of living is very, very, very high.
Yes.
California, Washington, D.C., New York, like they're notorious for high cost of living.
Yep.
And this is where I want to get your opinion. They all happen to be Democratic leaning states. They're all left leaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it that minimum wage is the highest because of the cost of living is high? Or is it the opposite? Is the cost of living high because the minimum wage is high? I guess it's like the chicken or egg situation. Yeah. But like I don't have a exact conclusion, but I think that kind of supports the argument that we're trying to make. And I could be wrong. It could be that naturally, without any political influence, the cost of living in those areas are just naturally high. I could see that too.
Yeah.
But I think it's too coincidental to say we talked about, hey, having higher minimum wage is going to just lead to inflation over time. Like we know this, and we see that exactly where it's happening.
Okay.
So yeah, which one do you think came first? Or
when I think that doesn't make sense. I was gonna say I think minimum wage is we have more control over minimum wage than we do over cost of living, if that makes yes, we being the state or the government, where I think if you create a society, put it somewhere and just insert a base level of cash and just let it operate as an experiment, 10 years go by, and then you see however those people operate, or however many businesses are generated, how many people are working, how many people leave, however many come, that is going to naturally give you a kind of cost of living based on, I don't know, is it by the water? Is it, those are all kind of coastal too.
yeah.
All these effects, right? That are going to give you how much it costs to live, how much groceries cost. Those are more, I think, economically, maybe societally driven, whereas minimum wage is more reactionary to that, I guess. I think minimum wage is more reactionary to that, vice the cost of housing, the price of groceries being reactionary to minimum wage. I think, you know what I'm saying? I think minimum wage comes as a result of those local cost of living. I don't think minimum wage is because minimum wage is high, now we can jack up the house prices. I don't think that it's a good question though, but I think minimum wage is more reactionary.
Yeah, I was maybe not the housing price, but everyday living,
everyday,
the groceries and stuff that everyone needs, regardless of if you're rich or poor. But okay, I'll buy that. So it's one of the examples. So you think that cities became expensive, so they wanted to match minimum wage. But let's say that's true, right? And even if we say that's true, I can still want to add that increasing the minimum wage still has, even if it was a reactionary decision that was made to account for the higher living cost. Raising the minimum wage also contributed to making it more higher than it.
That also could, it could be create a cycle, which then it gets scary because it's the cost of living goes high, so you have to raise the minimum wage. When you raise the minimum wage, the cost of living goes up, and it's okay, then I think you have to look at something outside of cost of living and minimum wage, some other economic factor to like to stop that or stifle that. Because if we just look at those two, you're right. I think it would just spiral out of control. And then 30 years from now, to live in Washington, it's freaking minimum wage is $50 because you know what I mean. So
one of my buddies bought a house in the DC area, and then it was crazy because I was like, oh, like we have expensive markets, and I live in Phoenix.
Yep.
Like we have expensive markets like Scottsdale. But I was like,
it's probably not touching.
Scottsdale was expensive, but like it was anything in Scottsdale. Like DC would have been probably had additional 100K or 200K on top. Yeah, and But as a counter argument, not necessarily a counter argument, but another data point on the extreme polar end is one of the things that we're talking about is Oklahoma. When we were looking at this minimum wage stuff, Oklahoma was like one of those states that did like their state minimum wage was lower than $7.25 or something like that, right? And then, but then obviously at the federal guideline is set, so they still have to follow the $7.25. But you kind of see. Like Oklahoma, with it being $7.25, I'm not trying to make a correlation, but I'm trying to point out a data point.
Yeah,
it's one of the lowest places, or one of the cheapest places to live, and even own real estate there too, like housing. Because my first rental that my wife and I still have today, we bought it in the suburb of Oklahoma City, where my wife lives at the time. And I mean, it's a really nice house. Like if that was in Phoenix, that would have been a $600,000 house.
Yep.
But then because it's in Oklahoma, it's like $300K.
Yeah.
And it's just much cheaper than just cost of living cheaper. And I like I said, I can't make a direct correlation, but I think it may have something to do with it.
I absolutely think there's a correlation. Minimum wage, real estate prices, cost of living, i.e. groceries. They're all, and you see in these areas like Texas has the bare minimum wage, Oklahoma, Wyoming, like they're all It's not like I think in most of these, like the real estate's really high, but the groceries are super cheap. Yeah, in California, the groceries are expensive. The real estate's expensive, but again, the minimum wage is also really gas is all everything. But so they're definitely correlated. I would say for sure. Yeah, and just bring up another random point of kind of something I said earlier. Like if you raise the minimum wage, going back to the welfare thing, that could encourage those people, maybe incentivize them to be like, oh man, minimum wage jumps from $7.25, now it's $11. Like, okay, let me try to go, let me put in some more applications, let me foster a skill, like let me try to get a job. And maybe it decreases welfare, which is another government program that you and I deemed is probably failing. But it's funny because we also said how if minimum wage increases, people could employ less people or shrink their labor force, which again is just gonna put people back on welfare. So it's like, and there's no way to quantify which one would be more to see if we should implement this. Like, are jobs gonna decrease the labor force more, or are more people gonna be incentivized to work? Those are intangibles that you just have to use historical statistics to make the best accurate guess, essentially, but you never really know. So it's like,
exactly what you said, because we don't know, because it could be in a forever cycle, like you said, right? It could be this thing that it just happens forever. Like it leans one way, then people get unemployed and goes on welfare, and then leans another way, and then it's back and forth. That's why I'm like, I think the message isn't, hey, let's try to get minimum wage to the highest possible place, and don't worry about the minimum wage. Go get an education, get a skilled or trade that pays you well in the marketplace. It's supply and demand, right? Like the less people that do it, the harder it is to do it. Like the chances are you're gonna get paid more. And I just think that's such a better message for people's like careers, their family, their growth potential as a person. Like I just think that's so much better than just saying, hey, blanketly screw these small businesses, raise the minimum wage. like I just don't see it.
Yeah, and I mean, to caveat that, I think it does. It is a better message. It's like more encouraging to actually be a change agent, like you yourself make change in your own life. But I can't say that without bringing up that, there are people that are in circumstances like maybe there's somebody trying to do that, but they need a adequate minimum wage job while they're trying to build their skills or while they're trying to further their education in the meantime, so they can live essentially. So yeah, I mean, I agree with your overall message, but I think for those people that are trying to better themselves, because they're not going to wake up the next day and just be better, like in the meantime, maybe they could be better compensated, or maybe they're pushing for themselves to like be better compensated. Now, there are a large majority of people that are just like ain't trying to do nothing different, or wouldn't do anything different. Maybe they say they would, but it's just like, I'm trying to get more money. Like, of course, who doesn't want more money, especially in it from a disadvantaged perspective. Like if you're already making little, like of course you want more money. That's why like people were going crazy over the stimulus checks. It's just like, drop more money in my bank account. Like, yeah, okay, cool. But to your point, a better message would be to try to do something that
it's just very unfortunate because the better message in my eyes, or we can agree on, is not the most popular message. And then I do think if I said that to a lot of people, I'll get fought back with exactly what you said, right? And I think what you said, sure, is there people out there that's trying to make them better themselves by working minimum wage? Sure, I'll buy that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the majority is what you said afterwards, is like they're not really trying to change it, right? So that like my message is for the general. I'm trying to make it generalized for everyone.
I got you.
And it's, I don't know. There's so much injustice and inequality. I get that, but I was in the shoes of someone working a minimum wage, paid for my own education. I was like, when I went to school, I was like, I'll take an engineering major. I feel like they make a little bit more money.
Yeah.
That was literally the decision I made. Like, it was like and then I was like, it turned out to be good. So yeah, sure. If we go on the sob story side for people listening that like, oh, like there's so much blah, blah, blah. I get it. There's sobs. Everyone has a sob story, but I don't think it's
the majority.
And I don't see any downside to. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that you put it. Yeah. I'm not saying that you said that, but I'm saying for the general public, because I have talked about this with other people, and that's generally their response. It's like, oh, they, So yeah.
No, for sure.
What do you think? We're recording this January 15th. You become president in 5 days, and then your first executive order has to be something to do with minimum wage.
First off, I'm bringing in the best economist I can find, and I'll send them in a room, and I'm like, hey, y'all got a week. This is what I'm thinking. Like, how will this affect the market? What will the ripple effects have? But no, I would raise the minimum wage to no more than the federal minimum wage, to no more than, I feel like $8.50 is even like kind of being maybe $1, man. I'll be bold. I'll say $8.50.
Okay, cool.
I'll say $8.50. Yep. I don't think that would have too much of a secondary, tertiary effects negatively. And if nothing else, you can always, I mean, now it's not a good look, but like you can always, years go by, like retract it or readjust it. But again,
dude, imagine if they retracted the minimum.
I mean, it wouldn't be under my presidency. Like, I would at least hold that for 4 years and be out. Like, whoever the next guy might have to, but like, I'm setting it, and that's it for my term. Yeah, for my term.
If that happened, you might go down as one of the worst presidents. There's like,
and you're right. If I'm in office right now, yeah, I probably would be the worst president. But no, I don't.
Yeah, it's not.
I think that's a safe enough to be like, it's gonna do something that we can observe and we can see, but not like cripple,
Yeah, I
the
agree.
labor force or shake the equilibrium too much. Yeah.
Now, despite everything I said, I totally agree. I think 850, like, it's not gonna be drastic enough where, like everything I say, I may take a stance on one side, and in this case, I definitely took a stance on. I think whether we raise it or keep it the same, the raising portion done by the government is so arbitrary, and it could fall on the wrong side, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they could raise. I think they'll do more harm than good. So that's why I'm leaning towards
Got you.
not raising it. But I think with everything we talk about on the show, I don't think it's just black and white. I think there's somewhere down the line where it may have a perfect match on the equilibrium that we talked about, to say, hey, raising this amount on the federal minimum wage will actually be really good for the economy.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, I mean, and I think I do agree that the numerical value is probably closer to what you said of 850, and maybe come up with some kind of equation or some kind of metric
I'm
to
sure
go up every single year.
Exactly.
And I think that would be the most popular. And I would, if someone made an actual plan to do that, I would support it. Yeah, actual plan execution, I would support that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And bringing it full circle to rebel the initial point, like these people that are saying like blindly, and they're not. I mean, I might be putting words in people's mouths, but like blindly, like we just need to raise the minimum wage or significantly raise it, because I guarantee you, I could propose to people that want the minimum wage we raise, be like, hey, what if we raise it to 850? And they're gonna be like, $1.25. Like, what's that gonna do? We might as well not even raise it. And it's like, okay, let's see. This is, I guarantee you, there would be a large portion of those people that it would be met with that. So again, it needs to have deep analysis. There, I'm sure there's an equation that exists to, my little self I think a marginal raising would be the best bet. But yeah, that's why we're here, to have these wonderful discussions. So yeah, that's it on minimum wage. That's our take. Again, great discussion. I think we had a lot of good points that are rarely talked about. And yeah, that's what we like to do and enjoy doing. So, B, you got anything?
Yeah, I'm just glad, like you said, I hear about it all the time, but then
Oh yeah,
there's not a conversation going back and forth about it. So
right.
yeah, to echo your point, I'm glad we can talk about it openly. And
Yeah.
if there's any hate, I don't mind. It's okay. We all have different beliefs and
Yeah.
thinking. So
Yeah, the back and forth is great. That's what we do best. And outside opinions or add-ons to what we're saying are always welcome. Please, we're on all social media platforms. Please add comments, all streaming platforms as well, for the episodes where you can get the audio, visuals on the YouTube. So let us know. We'd love to hear it and take it in. We're probably going to do some part 2s to some episodes down the line, and get some guests on, which we're trying to explore that element as well. And there's more to come there. So stay tuned. That's what we got for you. See you next week.